Hello, and welcome to the Ageless Core. In this brief little program is to enlighten you on ways to train your core without ever having to be on the floor. It's very antiquated to lay on our back and do crunches, leg kicks, etc., which is overusing the hip flexors. We know so much more today that really when our foot enters into the ground, you're activating your core. But a lot of times people think that, by doing a lot of crunches, they're going to have this six pack, et cetera, et cetera. But really, every time our foot enters into the ground, our whole core body is reacting to stimulus. And if we can start looking at the fact that where we reach, how we bend, how we move, our body is moving as a whole versus a part intuitively. So if we can start thinking that's the way to actually train our core and start thinking about how it feels and integrating every part of our body, the more functional we become, in everything that we do, from whether you're a snow skier or snowboarder or pickleball player, it requires that we move three-dimensionally all the time. But let's talk about those deep core muscles. Now, here's one of our new colors of the bender ball. By placing the ball just above the knees and just gently activating your inner thighs or just engaging your inner thighs. Back in the day, we would say squeeze, burn, woo, fry, etc., as opposed to engaging and lifting. When we engage and lift, we're activating those deep core muscles, which is so vital for our internal organs and keeping everything healthy. So once again, as we are in this position and our feet are a little bit wider than hip distance, by sitting down into your squat and just coming back up without ever squeezing the ball, but just holding it there, what do you notice when you straighten the legs? You start to lift through your pelvic floor. But if you try this move now, squeeze the ball as hard as you can. First of all, my knees don't like that. And when I'm doing this, the only place that I'm really feeling tension is in my hip flexors. So as we move into a hip flex position, to a hip extended position, why not really feel those deep pelvic floor muscles lift? But that does take a bit of a conscious effort to do that. Even when we're lowering, and let's say we shift to one side and we shift to the other side, for example, as you start to do this, I don't want you to think of like squeezing the ball in. There's no reason to do that, but just lifting and just pausing for that moment. The left side of your body is going to be engaging to hold you here. So if we can just start to think of, how do I want my body to remain ageless? How do I want my body to have vibrancy and integrity and vitality to it? I have to think of ways in which I can move that basically motion is lotion. But if I'm sitting here, like I'm holding onto a bar and I'm like, squeeze, 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 for example, then I'm really shortening up my tissue. And we shorten our tissue so much by just sitting all day long. So once again, by placing the ball in between the thighs, my knees are in better alignment and I can feel those deep core muscles. I really suggest you try that, as opposed to thinking that you've got to squeeze the ball. There's no really reason to do that. Because at the end of the day, when we're jogging, walking, or moving, we want to be lifted out of our joints and actually compressing them. So same goes true here. When we think of a lunge, an upright lunge or a hinge lunge, a lot of times people feel discomfort like in their knees. But with a ball here, I'm not lunging that far forward, but I have kinesthetic feedback of where I need to be as I lift and lower. And I start to work into my glutes and hamstrings, and I feel this really good dynamic movement. So even on the other side, being here, as I lift and lower, and I start to work into my balance here, the ball is creating better alignment for my body, for my knees, etc., as I move up and down. And then eventually we can take the ball away. So in our vertical, core exercises, again, when we create a little bit of imbalance here, so in other words, if I have you just place your right foot on the ball, you're not trying to squeeze it or squish it. You're just simply noticing that maybe this side of my body, I have to create a little bit of instability, but I'm going to create stability on the other side. But here's the caveat. Start to rotate. Even if it's your upper body is rotating, or just your head is rotating, or your eyes are rotating, or you start to side bend from side to side, all these actions are having an effect on this hip. Not this one, but this one. So by feeling this, it gives me an opportunity, for example, to go, wow, okay, I'm creating maybe a stronger hip joint just by learning how to lift. And even if I'm just, again, reaching, rotating, all this is creating this instability, of which what happens when you're creating this kind of instability? Stability starts to happen intuitively in your core body, okay, if that makes sense. But if I'm collapsed, I'm not thinking about it. But when I learn to lift, then all of a sudden, wonderful things start to happen. So same goes true if, for example, if we're teaching our clients, especially everyone's new in the beginning of the year, and we really want to work on strengthening our whole body here. And planking is great. A lot of times people hate planking because they feel it in their wrists, they feel it in their lower back, because they're not in good alignment. But the ball will help me to get into better alignment by placing the ball underneath my sternum. And again, rather than squishing into it, now I can't breathe, I want you to think of lifting and hovering off the ball. And immediately, I'm in better alignment. And then when I lift my knees off of the mat, I'm going to really feel the work here. So there can be a shift forward and back, or we can do a single leg lift without raising the hips. And this is forcing me to be in better alignment of my core, right? So again, all these little nuances are going to help us to have an ageless core body. So again, when I created the ball years ago, my intention was, when it's used correctly for stability, it creates better mobility and stability. So in here, we drape ourselves over the ball, and you want to think from shoulder to hip, all the way down to your toes is one long line. And so you've created this length, and then maybe even take that foot back, maybe an inch. Then when I take the elbow away and I start to lift and lower here, I start to find this really wonderful dynamic resistance in my core as I lift and lower. So the beauty of this is I'm not crunching up into my body, but I'm lengthening here, and then I'm coming back to like a neutral alignment in the frontal plane. That one is so good because we're staying out of our low back, we're lengthening our hip flexor, and I find I'm much better on one side versus the other. So just by working here, it's giving me this dynamic movement in my side body, which I want. Now, in a seated position, this of course is my favorite one. And as you settle back into the ball, so just settle into it and just notice what you feel. Most people would sit here and go, I'm not feeling anything. But when you start to look up and you bring your arms up with you, and when you sit back into the ball, and when we start to lift and lower here, then the magic happens. So from sternum to pubic bone, now as I start to bend my elbows or just change position in my arms, or even closing your eyes here, is going to have a dramatic effect on what you feel in the front of the body. And even though we might think we're isolating only the front of the body, everything is working very synergistically, as to where if I'm here and I'm laying on my back and I'm doing crunches, I'm up against a hard surface and I have no load to explode here, zero. And then when you start adding in this stuff, all right, literally we're pulling on our neck and we're overusing our hip flexors. So for me, disengaging these muscles, because they're shortening all the time. If you think about in a seated position, if I can get extension out of my body while my hip flexors are disengaged, magic starts to happen and I get stronger here. So by simply lifting up and looking up, and then adding a rotation by dropping the elbow and coming back to center, and dropping the elbow and coming back to center, I'm gonna start to rotate and get this dynamic movement. Now, people, you'll see them doing this fast twist with a medicine ball. I mean, my heart just aches for anybody's spine that's doing that because it's so detrimental to the low back. But if I'm moving here and I'm moving slow with intention, then I'm protecting my back, but I'm really working in through those deep spiral muscles of the core. So these are just a couple ideas that you can use going into the new year. So it's important to remember as we move into the new year, we have new goals, we all do it, that if you stick to movements that don't create pain in your body, then you're going to make a lifetime change. However, if you go into a workout program and you're so sore for like 3 or 4 days, because you've been doing all this stuff, then your ability to stick to something somewhat decreases. So you want to ease into anything that you're learning how to do. And especially with core training, when it's done correctly, it's magic. Again, this is Leslie, and thank you for joining me for Ageless Core. It's an ageless core body.